Hauka, mimi tue. Say it back. Hauka, mimi tue. Okay. No, that was me just saying okay. Now stand up. Everybody stand up. Everyone stand up. Now say it again. Hauka. Say hauka, mimi, tuyo. So that's the 2 ways to say, it's 2 of the 5 ways to say hello. You can sit back down. I love you kids. So good with directions. That is 2 of the 5 ways to say hello in the Cahuilla language. The first is when you're sitting. Then the second was when you're standing. There's also a hello that you say when you're lying down. There's also a hello you say when someone's walking. There's also a hello you say when someone's running. I like to start having these conversations in this way because this art show is trying to recenter the idea of an entire region in an indigenous practice and through indigenous knowledge. My name is Jason Montgomery. I am originally from El Centro, California. I am of Kumeyaay and Tongva descent. Those are 2 different native Californian peoples. The death of Lake Cahuilla, I am a Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art fellow. I just did 30 days at the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Arts in the Berkshires in North Adams. Saying it like that makes it sound like jail. I just did 30 days. At the Berkshire in North Adams in the Berkshires as a resident. Part of my time there was working on this show. This show deals with the death of Lake Cahuilla, which is sometimes colloquially and incorrectly called the Salton Sea. The Salton Sea is a name that was given to it much, much later. So I know you guys have been studying it. Anybody got one fact about Lake Cahuilla you can tell me?
Hopefully the right one is the biggest lake in California.
Yep. Yep. One more? Got one more? Don't make me point at somebody.
Oh, you can do it though.
You right over there. One fact. I'll even take it's in California.
Or you can phone a friend and ask Kevin.
Okay, I'll give you one. The current iteration of Lake Cahuilla is actually man-made. The place that we call the Salton Sea is actually a man-made issue, and we'll talk about it because it's part of the larger issue around the death of Lake Cahuilla. Now, I know some of y'all might be saying like, this is a science class. Why do we have an art guy in it? Like, and why is this art guy talking about it? Because over the past, I would say, 25 years of my artistic career, I have partnered across schools, across education, across different platforms, because art is a way that helps us understand the world. Art is another way to communicate issues around the world. And so, you know, there's currently one of my favorite conferences happens in San Francisco, or not San Francisco, in San Diego every year at the San Diego State University. And it's a conference between molecular scientists, people who study genes, and artists. And it's this way of 2 very kind of different ways of looking and thinking about the world coming together and discussing the world. So for me, this is a very personal exhibit and a very personal subject because it literally is about my home and the home of my people. But in another way, I'm standing in Holyoke, 3,000 miles away from it, trying to talk to you about it because I think it talks to a larger issue that we have with how we deal with the environment and how we look at the natural world. So, fun facts. So Lake Cahuilla, or the Salton Sea as it exists now, it is a cyclical inland sea that Native people have known about forever. And in fact, when the Portuguese and the Spanish first arrived, they would say like, oh, there was an ocean here, it will return. And they ask like, well, where did it go? And they're like, it leaves little by little. And in fact, it was one of the names of this area along with Ina Osha, which means literally trail of birds. So this used to be, it would stretch from, and I want you to imagine, everyone know where New York City is? Oh, come on, you know where New York City is. Again, in comparison to where you're at right now. Imagine an ocean that stretched from here at Holyoke all the way down to New York City, and from here in Holyoke all the way to Boston. That is the distance we are talking about of this inland ocean that existed in California. And what would happen is, over the years, as rain and snow melted in the Colorados, it would flow down what we call the Colorado River, which would meander its course and fill this inland sea from basically a place called India, which may not mean, actually, there's a place that you may know. Everyone heard of Coachella? Don't lie to me. You're all young. You know Coachella. From Coachella all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico. We're talking about a huge tract of land. Now, historically, before contact, there was a variety of people who would use Lake Cahuilla as part of our traditional migration and traditional way of life. There was the Kumeyaay, and we exist both on the northern and the southern part of the U.S.-Mexico border. There's Ipai to the north and Tipai to the south. There's the Lesueño people, the Cahuilla people, and the Cuchican people, who more often are referred to as the Yuma people. As this sea would fill and then retract cyclically, they would either use it for fishing, farming, or when it was completely gone, they would come down, and I know personally they would mine obsidian and pottery. And I know personally because my people were in the obsidian business. Obsidian being probably one of the more precious minerals that are around. I'm going through a lot of background before we actually start talking about art stuff. Everyone okay with that? Everyone all right with that? All right. So this is kind of the most current watershed basin map of the area. And as you can see, this would represent the actual Lake Cahuilla from here out to here. So with San Diego and Tijuana being on this side of the mountains. We're talking about a huge tract of land that is now functionally extinct. There's a small amount of water left, which I know I saw some of your guys' paper on, which is called the Salton Sea. Now, one of the biggest kind of misnomers around the Salton Sea is that it is part of, it is both a man-made natural disaster and part of an ongoing misuse of the land by the state of California. When I say it's a misnomer, it's because while it is technically man-made, what it is actually the remnants of that last sea. It's the last bit of it. Because in 1900, the state of California created the Alamo Canal, way out here in the middle of it, doesn't really matter for the course of this conversation. And as in 1900, they create this canal to divert water down into the Salt Basin, which is what they used to call this whole area, for agricultural purposes. Now, of course, they hadn't really thought to ask the native people, like, hey, what happens out here? Because native people would have been like, you don't want to do that. It's going to flood eventually. Like, it's not flooded now, but it's going to flood. And when it floods everything. But they were like, no, they don't know what they're talking about. Deserts don't become lakes. That's not how things work. Well, around 1905, that's exactly what happened. There was a huge snowpack in the Colorado. It melted and proceeded to flood this entire area, once again, like it had been doing for thousands upon thousands of years. The Alamo Canal burst its banks, the water flooded in. It flooded for 2 years nonstop. It flooded so much that it was the entire volume of the Colorado River was from about right here in the Coachella Valley all the way down through contemporary Mexicali. Multiple feet of water on the ground. And it was unstoppable. So for these 2 years, the Southern Pacific Railroad actually attempted to stop this, and they literally ended up having to build a massive bridge across the desert, which still exists, and they were dumping everything, literally anything they could get their hands on. Old rail trucks, houses that they had picked up that had been floated off of their foundations, and just dumping it to try to stop this water. Because what would naturally happen is the water would come down from the Colorado River through the arroyos and just flood the whole area for probably about 10 to 20 years. Fill the whole basin up with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of gallons of water and create the inland sea. Southern Pacific Railroad wasn't having that. So they blocked it off. And for about 19 years, things kind of were just okay. Now, it may be hard for you to imagine if you've never been to this area, but it's actually incredibly hot. It's about 109 to 116 during the summertime.
That's even hotter than Florida.
Yeah, no, it's way hot. I think our record is 123. Like we fight with Death Valley for hottest place in California on the yearly. Needless to say, my auntie was like, "Are you going to come home for 4th of July?" I was like, "Absolutely not." It's
I'm not sure I understand.
me neither. So what happens though is, at that point, practices of agriculture create kind of a weird homeostasis, and there's enough water being drained off from the farming that's happening to kind of keep the lake active. And if there's a big pot of water out somewhere, white people with boats show up. And it became a resort area. And from about 1950 to about 1960, this was a huge resort population. Like you had Frank Sinatra tootling around on boats, you had the Beach Boys doing concerts. It was called in many ways the Riviera of Southern California. And then something happened. Around 1970, the state of California realizes that, well, not just the state of California, the Imperial Irrigation District, who controlled the water, realized they could make more money selling water than anyone could make selling food. And so they divert the water to Los Angeles and San Diego, and suddenly the lake starts to dry. Now, that of course bombs out all of the people living around it, bombs out the houses, but something else also happens that they weren't really expecting. Now, mind you, from about 1917 on, the University of California had been practicing an ecological experiment. They had literally been bringing in an entire ecosystem into this freshwater lake, or this inland lake. From the smallest mollusk and the smallest clams all the way up to large fish. They had built an inland sea ecosystem. And so they're like, oh, well, an ecosystem, it'll thrive on its own. It doesn't need an exit of water and an inlet of water. It'll be fine. It'll find balance. But that's not what happens. So around 1970, as the water starts to dissipate, the water level starts to drop across the lake, and we end up, so when I was a kid, where this sign is, and you wouldn't know this, this sign was all water. I'm only 45 years old. So when I'm talking about a kid, this was the 1980s. I'm sure most of y'all are born in the 90s. 96, 97?
This century.
This century? Good God! Okay, when was everybody born? 2005, raise your hand. Oh my God. I'm ancient. You've all hurt me deeply. No, come on. Buck up. Anyway, but by the 1980s, there was water all the way up to here. The point is, what no one was expecting, even as there started to be the die-off of the ecosystem that they built, was what was underneath that ecosystem. Because through the 20s and 30s, we'll get to the art in a minute. Through the 20s and 30s, what had happened was all of the heavy metals and chemicals that were being utilized in the agriculture were floating to the bottom of this inland sea. So as it starts to dry up, all of that stuff starts getting exposed. And because it's all been crystallized through the salt, it starts to particulate and it's flowing everywhere over that entire region. There's people who speculate by the time the lake is completely gone, there's an ecological time bomb literally waiting to wipe out Coachella, Riverside, and Indio, California. And I don't mean like it's gonna wipe, I mean it's gonna poison everybody. Like literally the levels of like lung cancer and asthma in those regions are already off the charts. When it finally hits like lake bed, we're talking about a huge ecological disaster. So that's kind of the background that led myself and the other artists who I work with at Attack Bear Press to say, like, what can we do about this? Like, how can we talk about this in a way that like captures the impending troubles and hopefully communicates it out to people so that we can make some kind of action about it, but also that addresses the fact that like there's a deep loss that's happened here. Like we talk about in the world about decolonization and anti-racist work, right? How do you address something like this where the very land that has been integral to your people for thousands and tens of thousands of years is now literally a ticking time bomb in the middle of the desert? So these are the questions that we asked as artists as we started to go out and try to make a show about this, about the ecology of it, the social impact of it, and the history of it. So I hope you all understand that like when we talk about the sciences and we talk about the science behind it, which I am kind of glossing over for time, that isn't separate from the art that we create. And in fact, like they should be working and being one and the same. And for those of you who are wondering, yes, I did get money to do all this nonsense. So I headed out in the desert. I'm going to pass some things around so that you can see before we start talking about like the actual visual art. I headed out in the desert first to collect obsidian from, there is a, do you mind passing that back? There is a volcanic caldera on the far side of the lake. Yeah, okay, let's get the Minecraft jokes out of the way. Come on. Yeah, come on. I got kids. No, I actually enjoy Minecraft a great deal.
You look like you're 21 or in your early 20s.
No, I am 45 years old, but thank you. No, so obsidian, there's a large obsidian caldera. It's actually called the like obsidian pile Cahuilla. So we went out and we mined. We'll be going back in 2026 to take larger samples out of this obsidian pit. We also then went to the former, they're called the mud pots. They're a volcanic clay pot that exists out there to pull clay that we use for this. I'm not going to pass this around. For one, it is very delicate. For two, it's pretty toxic.
What's toxic about it?
Okay, so this, we threw a pot at using the clay in the traditional Kumeyaay manner. Then we submerged this pot for 30 days in water that we brought back from the lake. We brought samples of water back from the lake itself. This is part of the sample that we brought back. We pulled it out and we proceeded to see what would happen. And what happened was a salt, a monoaluminum phosphate, which was utilized in a lot of fertilizers. It proceeded to grow both salt crystals and fungus, which was really interesting. But we were like, okay, well, like that's, of course, this is a heavily salinated like body of water. But when we then opened it back up, we realized there's also mercury, there's a fair amount of lead, there's a fair amount of heavy metals. And that's the other thing I want to say. Anything you touch from here, wash your hands before you put your hands near your mouth. Because, yeah, sorry, I should have said that earlier. Anything you touch that I hand around, do not put your hands back in your mouth. Most of it has been cleaned, but I can't promise that there aren't some amounts of heavy metals on it. because that's the reality of how toxic this area actually is. When I took this photograph, it was my cousin and I, my cousin who's part of the Imperial Irrigation District, we were standing there, this is by the mud pots to go dig the pots for this mud. I would say about 15 minutes later, wind blew up. A wind blew up and we realized we had to abandon the site because it was coming in off the playa, it was coming in off of the lake bed. Oh, did anyone not see it? Yeah. It was coming in off the playa and we realized that we did not have respirators. And so the chances of us getting heavy metal poisoning was incredibly high. So when people say art's not fun or dangerous, they're wrong. Because we realized in that moment, we'd probably get poisoned. It's okay, you're probably fine. It's just a precaution. And this is an important, this is an important message, guys, around all ecology. You never know what something really is, particularly when you're dealing with found materials. You don't know where it's been, you don't know what it's been doing. And so guys, you want to make sure that you think about that and use it as a precaution. And the hand sanitizer, not gonna work. No, you need water, soap and water. Soap, yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah. It's not gonna work because what you're trying to do is actually remove the material from your hands. Hand sanitizer just moves it around. So, okay. Everyone ready to move on to the art? Everyone ready to move on to talk about the art? Okay. Here's the thing. Is there one person in this room who's not grown? Anybody below 10 years old in this room? Anyone feel like mentally they are incapable of looking at grown things without losing your mind? Anybody? You can identify yourselves if you are. It's fine. Okay. No, you can chuckle. It's funny. Grown things can be funny, but the point is, you may see things and be like, oh my God, you're grown enough. And if you're grown enough, you should be able to say, okay, I'm grown. I understand what I'm looking at is a piece of artistic expression, right? Okay, so we'll start with the first piece. This first piece, actually, you'll be like, why is there a dinosaur on it? Because people are nonsense. As we move through this show, one of the things that we wanted to do was try to express the region, the area. And how do you express the region or the area but without traveling and moving through it? So we started our kind of artistic adventure up outside of where the Mohegan Sun is. Oops, I forgot that picture. Nope, I did not. Okay. Where the Mohegan Sun, sorry. We started our adventure up by the beginning of the Imperial Valley Road that goes down through the Cahuilla casino area. And out there, they have a series of giant dinosaurs. You may have seen them in TV and movies. I want to say, if you've ever seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure, but you're all too young. Doesn't matter. So what we tried to do was create a series of large collages. This piece is about 4 by 2 feet. It is a dinosaur. Yeah, wow. I was just explaining that. Because one of the things we wanted to talk about was the absurdity of this whole situation. That there's literally a tourist trap on a giant ticking time bomb. There's literally a place where you can go and stand in a giant ceramic dinosaur 10 miles away from something that may kill 100,000 people. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the nonsense. It's the nonsense. So part of our art and part of what we were trying to express with this was this idea of there's craziness in the world. Moving on, which leads us to Coachella. That's the name of this piece. It's the same thing. I work primarily in found materials and collage. I don't know how much art stuff to talk about, how much science stuff to talk about. You guys tell me. I'll talk about all the stuffs? Fair enough. Okay, so primarily what I do is I work in found materials collage, and I do that for a couple of reasons. One is because I fancy myself as a decolonial artist. Decolonial artists are looking to address the idea of colonization by Europe and the Americas. The collage work I do, I take materials from the late 1800s through 1974, and I utilize those to create not necessarily like surreal pictures, but just backdrops. And I use the late 1800s because that's about the time you all showed up in California. So the US showed up in California around 1872. And I go to 1974 because that was when the signing of the Native American Rights Act was. 1974, the Native American Rights Act was signed by the United States government, and we got to have the rights that everybody else did. 1974, I was born in 1978. We weren't people, technically, and it's a trip. We weren't full people in the United States until 1974. So I create these images and then I overlay. You'll see some of these kind of designs. Those are taken from Native California and cave art. There are three major kind of California movements around art. Four, if you want to be a dick about it. The first is basket weaving. I wear this particular pendant or jokal. It is weaved by a Kumiye basket weaver. There's pottery, and then there's cave art, and the other one is shell bead creation, but that was mainly a trade thing. So I like to work those through over the art to create these designs as a way of kind of reestablishing that art practice. Yeah, I know. This picture I integrated into the show. It is taken from the shoreline of the far shoreline of the Salton Sea. This was part of what we were doing when we were out there collecting these materials. I'll hand some of those around. Okay, I'm handing that back. So there are shells, sand, and clay that we've taken that we brought in. We took this with a 35 millimeter or a 32 millimeter camera that we altered the shutter to so that we could get the blur and the dark lines. The next piece is done in the same style with the bright pinks and the bright blues. This is the western shoreline. This is where all of these materials would have come from. So, as I said, this was actually a big resort spot. So this is taken from a boat dock as we were walking out about 2 miles into the water. The stuff you see right here is actually calcified mussels, the little guys that you'll see falling around. They all came out of the same project from the University of California. Shells. Because remember, the University of California from about the 1920s tried to create an entire ecosystem. So it wasn't that they just came and dumped fish. They actually came and brought in saltwater mollusk and created these huge mollusk beds throughout the entire region.
I'm gonna wash my hands again.
Yes, please. The jars are a little safer, but wash your hands. This piece is from the Bombay Beach, which I actually brought in to show you the actual piece. So the actual piece is on this side of the thing. And I know you're probably saying, well, like, it's abstract, right? It looks like you found garbage and put garbage on a piece of paper. And in a lot of ways that's accurate. Mean, but accurate. one of the reasons that I choose to work in the abstract is because I believe firmly that when we're talking about people, and that's what we're talking about in this work. When we're talking about people as artists, we have a responsibility to treat them respectfully and not to further hurt or further subjugate them through our work. That's why we don't represent people as people. Because when you take someone at their worst moment and you capture that through photography or you capture that through portraiture, you are trapping them in that moment. And that becomes their identity, and that becomes what they are remembered as. So we work in abstraction as a way to get away from that and to honor the people who came before us by not just taking them and making them subject. Also, I'm not very talented.
You definitely are, because like, you definitely are talented. Because like, I don't know how much time you spent on this, but it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I spent about 5 months working on this project. And like I said, in 2026, we'll be doing a second iteration of this project at the Museum of Contemporary Art up in North Adams. We'll be doing a much larger version of this, but we'll talk about it a little bit later. And I would encourage you before we end at 1:30? Okay, at 1:30, I'm going to put out a couple pieces. Come over and please take a look at them a little closer. You'll also see I've integrated some of this material into the pieces. So, again, might be toxic. Again, this piece actually, because I chose to include it into this presentation because there's something very interesting happening right now with this entire area. How many of y'all got a cell phone? How many of you got something with a lithium battery in it?
What's a lithium battery?
Lithium battery. Your cell phone battery. If you got a battery inside of something that you cannot take out, it's a removable. You have lithium. You have lithium on you. It is an important mineral that is used in electronics and battery production. They discovered lithium out in this area. Lithium comes in incredibly small amounts, and it has to be strip mined. It's a white powder that has to literally be strip mined out of the ground. That is the plan for the entirety of my homeland, is to be stripped down for the batteries that make your cell phones. So in this particular piece, we wanted to kind of address that. That's why it is all white. There are trace elements of lithium in there, probably trace elements of lithium in this too, but because it's a way of kind of addressing that this, which used to be such a vital component to our existence, is now this, a giant toxic waste dump. And this happened not over the course of thousands of years. We're talking 1970 to today. 50 years. Probably as old as some of your parents. Yeah, no, I'll say that. Definitely as old as your grandparents. That's the amount of time it took to take an entire region from here down to New York and from here to Boston and turn it into a ticking time bomb. When we talk about ecology and we talk about environmentalism and we talk about climate change, we are talking not necessarily about the change, but the speed that it happens. Because you can't cope with it. Maybe if we had 1,000 years to address this issue, we could do so safely, and we could do so in a way that would have an impact. But when we're talking about it happening in 50, 30, 20 years, how do you address that? And so that's one of the reasons that we also wanted to make this show, because we felt like we had to start talking about this on a larger scale. Boop. Does this have sound?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So this is another photo taken from the materials gathering trip. Right now, and it's hard to tell, we are about 5 miles into the lake. If I were to turn around, you would be able to see back at giant salt flats that are basically all of this material right here. One of the things that we did was, that's the sound of us walking across the playa, across the lake bed. That crunch is bone, leftover shell, and salt. At this point, we did have respirators on, is one of the reasons that I wasn't trying to film, because it was just too hard to actually film out there. About 5 or 6 seconds after we made a left turn, we hit our first migratory bird die-off. We went up about this way, went a little bit that way, and that's where we hit our first major bird die-off. When I say die-off, and I brought some of the bones with us, so I'm gonna hand these back.
So you gotta wash your hands after this?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. These are all bird bones. This was, again, literally our people used to call it Trail of Birds, because this was the largest bird migration stopover in North America at one point. We're talking enough birds that there were stories of not being able to see the sun as they traveled. No problem. As they traveled from the north to the south to South America. And so I hope you understand how this change to this environment doesn't just affect this environment, because all of those birds that traveled across the US and Canada and down into South America are suddenly gone. Boop. Which takes us to the next piece. Again, like I said, I deal with Native issues in my work. And this piece is called Indio, which is a city, but also the name that they gave to Native people, the Spanish gave to Native people. It is also a derogatory slur through most of Mexico to call someone Indio. So part of what we wanted to do was demonstrate that there used to be living and habitation structures all along the lake bed. And you can find them stretching across hundreds of miles, because we were a migratory population. We moved from the hills in San Diego County down to the desert and back and forth. Boop. This is the Obsidian Mound. So all of this is the same volcanic glass that I passed around before. In 2026, we'll be heading out here to pull as much of this out as we possibly can. At this point, we're looking at pulling hopefully a ton, maybe 2 tons out of it. An important message for anyone who's hey, this sounds like it could be fun. In 2026, I run 50 Arrow Gallery over in East Hampton. We're an art gallery. I run Attack Bear Press out of Holyoke. If you're this could be interesting, look us up. We will need interns to come with us. It will be, oh, sorry.
That's all right, man.
It'll be a week-long trip. We'll go out with bobcats and heavy machinery to pull clay and obsidian to bring it back for the show at the museum. So just a hint if that is of interest to you. I do a second kind of art along with every show I do. So I largely do installations with the collage pieces, but then I do digital art. I take high-resolution photographs of individual sections of the artwork, and I digitally alter them. I do that because I personally believe that that synthesis is the pathway to the pathway to liberation. We can't go back. And that is the tragic part of the death of Lake Cahuilla, is we can't go back. Literally, the ground is poisoned. How do we return home to that? We can't. We have to figure out how to move forward, and how we move forward is by taking parts of what's been there and working it into our own life in a way that is controlled and guided by us. Make sense? If I lost anybody?
Yeah.
Anybody bored?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Kind of, but it's interesting.
Kind of, but it's interesting. The final piece, and I did bring that I'm going to show you guys and we're going to talk about, is the All-American Canal. Because the All-American Canal is really the structure that was built that led to all of this. So along the U.S.-Mexico border, we have, as a nation, diverted the Colorado River so that it no longer flows down into Mexico. And we did this so that we could take all of that water and pump it to San Diego and to Los Angeles. This particular piece tries to talk about that. It's one of the reasons that we have the harsh borders in the blue. If you ever get a chance to see it, it is an engineering marvel. It's incredible to see because this is pumping an incredible amount of water down into these two states. These two cities. However, if you could look past there where the Colorado River used to be, it is now almost completely dry. And that was never the intention of this construction. But the water cycle has been so radically altered because of climate change that now the natural exit of the Colorado River almost is non-existent. So, and imagine,
Is there like man-made canals to like bring water from a different place?
So we would first have to dismantle this, which would mean that Los Angeles suddenly has no water. And the reality is Los Angeles isn't that far away from not having any water as it is.
Why would you have to get rid of that?
Because this is the man-made canal that diverted the natural flow of the water. Yeah, so this actually, what you're looking at right here, spans from Colorado all the way down to the U.S.-Mexico border. And it essentially, we took a river, said, you don't get to be a river anymore, and we built our own. So imagine right now if someone were to take, yeah, you're fine. If someone were to completely get rid of the Connecticut River, if we were just to say, nope, you don't get to be a river anymore, and we moved it, but much, much bigger, because Colorado is much bigger than the Connecticut. Where are we at? Oh, the Ogodones Dunes. This is taken from space. This used to be the shore of the lake. So this lake used to be right here. This is Arizona over in this area. This is California. All of this used to be covered with water. So if you can imagine how big we're actually talking about. I just think it's a really pretty picture. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what. So finally, one of the things that I wanted to show you guys was I wanted to leave you a little hopeful, like that the world is not completely without hope. So this project, and we toured this project as a part of the effort, it placed nearly 400,000 hay bales along the northern bank of the Salton Sea. And the hope is to generate dunes from the wind. So all of this is supposed to be a wind stop, so that as the wind blew and the sand blew, it would catch it and just giant dunes would form, so that they would capture all of this stuff and keep it there. And I think we hiked for about 6 hours that day and didn't make it even a half a way through. That's how massive of an effort we're talking. So there are people who are really trying, who are trying to do something, and who are trying to make sure that we can fix some of these mistakes. This image is Calexico. This leads us to almost Mexico. I was born in Calexico, so there. And then finally, you may hear this from a lot of Native activists about water being life, or water being the mother. It's the mother of everything. Nothing can really exist without it. None of us can survive without it. When we talk about protection, There are things that each and every one of us can do. They're little things that you may not even think about, like recycling that plastic bottle when you're done drinking your Gatorade. Turning the tap off when you're brushing your teeth. Little things can make a huge difference. Because without it, like, we're done. We're toast.